Back at it once again. It's a Tuesday, which means I will be streaming a little bit of design work today. Today I had originally earmarked as just working on finishing up a little standing desk design that I've got to get done. But as it turns out, I had another little design project that I started last night, and I'll be building tonight. So what I want to do is showcase and finish up that design document and then move back to the desk document. So if time permits, I'll get to the desk. If not, it'll be finished by the end of the week, and then I'll have a new design project for next week. But that's the work for the day. So I'll switch on over and get things going. So here I have these things here. I want the desk design doc is the second thing, but the first is what are called parallettes. Now parallettes are a type of gym equipment which actually, if I look here, there's all kinds of things here, right? So they're those things that the guy is holding on to there. So this I wonder if I can get the image. Let's see here if I can just have that pasted into the document itself. That's example image, example image there, and let's see if that works, and if it does, then we'll actually get a different image there served from the site directly, because I don't like using it from there. So yeah, okay, so that does work, but I don't want to use some other image I found. It'd be better, I think, if I could do my own. So actually, for a moment, what I'm going to do is actually draw it on the good old iPad here, which, let's check that it's working. Indeed it is. Let's go with, what's a good color that'll show up reasonably well? Let's do this green color. That'll show up on the websites, on the web page just fine. So how do I want to do this? We'll just do it very, very quickly, like this kind of thing. It's kind of just a really rough sketch. Really messing up the it's not what you would call perfect, but hey, that'll just be fine. Yeah, Something kind of like that. Right. And then no, that's wrong. Let's do it. Let's see here. Kind of like that. Right, and then kind of match that here, approximately like that. There. And in fact, whoop, I just locked my iPad there. You know what? You know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna cheat. I'm gonna try to cheat. Let's do freehand here. There we go. Okay. Right, so I copied this. Oop. There. So what I'll do is go to this layer, erase this. And move this inserted image about there, shrink it just a bit because it doesn't have to be perfect. Beautiful, thing of beauty that there's a way to merge it down. There we go. And then we just kind of fill in those details again. There we go. Okay, now all I really want to do is, I think off stream I might make this just a little better because it's not the best drawing I've ever done. But the idea, I think, is sufficiently clear. Let's try that one more time. Just like that. Right, now if we go here and just brush size is always a little bit of a thing here. Zoop. Zip that down. Like that. There we go. And this smooth out just a smidge, just a little bit. This is a sketch, so it really doesn't need to be perfect anyway. I just start to get a little particular sometimes. It's definitely unnecessary, but you know, I find it actually really relaxing to just sit and kind of doodle on the pad. I really like it. Oop, that's not an eraser. Let's get this out of the way there, and we'll just move that like that. Alright, I'd say that's sufficient. This looks weird. That's fine. Okay, so now duplicate that layer, shift it like this. There, and then we go here and erase like this. Anything that is occluded technically by the thing in front of it, like that. Nice and simple. Not too hard, just a quick sketch with nice good old copy paste. My favorite. Okay, now just merge it down. What am I doing here? Merge it. And let's try share layer to a PNG file. Oh. Just in case, don't want to show anything that isn't necessarily good to show. Alright, we'll do this. And we'll airdrop it. Perfect. We've got an export. Now, tools, adjust size. Oh man, it's huge. Fit into, sure. That's good enough for now. And file export that. Take off this little glove thing now. Should be good with that for a while. Let me do dev stylo work. I'll save it as parallettes sketch. Save that. And now we go here, and instead of this old jumble, we can just do parallettes sketch.png. Save that, and we'll see once it rebuilds, if it pulls in the sketch image. Indeed, it does. Sweet. Now, that color maybe not the best pick after all. I also realized that I didn't completely do it right. For a minute, I'm gonna re-export this so that the image itself fills up the whole square properly. So let me just get back here, close that preview. Doesn't matter. Right, so here fit to screen. And I also will quickly recolor it. Oh, here, let me so let me actually go with this color. That'll show up fairly nicely. Recolor, not the background, but that. Right. Oop. And so now it's just a matter of exporting it again, and I'll get right to it. Perfect. So now tools, adjust size, 700 pixels, sure. Click OK. File, export to the same spot and overwrite it, and then we'll have a decent looking image. Yes, I would like to replace it, please. Close that, refresh this. Of course, now it's too large, which comes from, let me do this here. If I put in a little custom style tag here for a moment, I can do style with just image max width 100%, and that should, upon rebuild, that should nicely bring that in size. At least I thought it would. Do a little inspect here. Oh, this is why? No. Missed something. I suppose it has to be in there up at the top, right? Find out. What am I just missing something silly? Oh, this is wrong. There we go. Okay. So now we've got the little sketch of those things. So the prose that I'm using here, I can change it up later as I go, but the cool thing about the designs so far is let me shift this image into the view a little easier. So that's the figure here. Actually, let me do Clojure mode. Hey Lumi, how's it going? Looks better every day. Hey, thanks. I'm feeling more and more confident with the approach and building up this library. It's circling around something pretty nice and pretty useful. There's a lot still to do, but yeah, every day I'm chunking away at it a little bit here and there. I stuck with the mechanical keyboard for the day anyway. Just to see if I actually want to get used to using it again. Okay, so question will be how well it scales if you ever want to use it for larger, more complicated designs. Yeah, so that is a very good question, and the sort of philosophical approach I think I'm taking to slowly chip away at that greater scale question is to keep doing more and more design projects with the library, so that over time it sort of is the library itself is being tested with real world design work, and as I improve my design work itself, I want to bring larger and larger projects into the sphere of using the library. So I kind of, as I scale up my engineering and design capabilities and ambition for bigger and bigger projects, the library I use to make those designs will slowly grow with it. So every feature that gets added into the library is in some sense directly necessary for the next design that I'm working on. That's sort of the broad approach that I think would maybe over time result in a pretty usable library. If I can actually execute on that is like a me thing then at that point, but that's kind of the idea, and I think I can get somewhere kind of close to it, but yeah, it's always an open question. Will it ever scale? I don't know, obviously, but we'll see what we can do. So what was I trying to do here? This figure, I want to shift it over, let's say about 4:4, try that. If I see this correctly, you don't lay out with constraints at all at the moment, right? And calculate positioning manually. Yeah, currently that's what I do. I have a prototype sort of idea. This wrapper here, this CAD view wrapper thing, automatically positions the view in the center of its own block there. If you add that eventually, the sampling will probably blow up things computationally. The sampling. Yeah, I mean, you're probably right, and I don't have direct solutions for those things at the moment. I kind of wonder if the right approach is constraints on the geometry side of things, and then in terms of rendering and layout, just some heuristics and sort of helpers, right? Like, for example, a common thing would be, well, if I give manually, if I give a viewport size of 500 by 500 and I pass in a rendered SVG, I just want to have it centered by default. So just like have some sensible defaults in there. I don't have a full solution, but you're right. If you have to sample tons of stuff constantly, yeah, you run into problems. I don't have a real solution for it yet. But I have this sort of CAD view idea here where I just pass in the thing to render, and it automatically builds 4 views at different angles and centers the rendered thing inside the view box, or the view box of that SVG, which is different than this figure one here where I'm manually moving the lines around still. But that's an example. This is just sort of a helpful function, but it's opinionated in the sense. How does it center? I forget. Let's see if I could find the this container thing here. I have this quadrant thing where it takes, you still provide a width, height, and a scale, and then the quadrant width and quadrant height are obviously just divided by 2 there, and then it puts SVGs in there, and it's wrapped. I'm just using CSS display flex wrap, so it's just I'm kind of like cheating by just using HTML and CSS stuff to do the moving around for me, and then centering. Where was that? Oh man, I already forget where I put it. That's another thing I was gonna move. I was gonna move all these things into just one namespace again, like you recommended. Okay. So the center view takes the width, height, and scale in the object. It gets the coordinates by right, so this, okay, here. Basically what it does is you pass in the object you want to draw and the size of the box you want to center it in. Then it finds the 2D projection of the 3D shape you've got, right? And then it uses this function bounding box center, and the bounding box just looks for the minimum x, maximum x, min y, max y, and finds the center point of that. And then the move coordinate for centering is guaranteed just to be that center point, I think, more or less. And then you just apply the move to that object in that particular view. So I guess it doesn't do any sampling. It draws the bounding box and finds the center point, uses that coordinate to move it. That's the simple explanation. So obviously what goes wrong with something like that is if the bounding box center isn't necessarily a useful place to have the view centered, It's just sort of, it's kind of a naive way to do it, but it works reasonably well for this kind of stuff. So, and it does, like, it doesn't account for, if I change the scale here, like if I make it, pardon me, if I make it 20, it does not automatically scale. So whatever scale you have, it passes that in. And so that's all zoomed in, and you can see that it doesn't resize the box for you or anything. That's still up to the user to provide a viewport that has enough room. So I kind of figured that would make sense. One thing I obviously did wrong is this view here is the correct orientation I want it to display at. I must have done something different with the front view here assumed a different orientation, so that I just have, that was inconsistent, so maybe I'll fix that in a minute. But yeah, I'm getting happier and happier with the results. This is still just using defs at the front of the file, so not implementing an atom yet. Probably something I'll want to do, but this should work reasonably well with... so let's take the thickness of this here, for example. If I want to, instead of being an 1/8 of an inch thick steel plate, I want to, let's imagine it's a 1/4 inch. So if I build this again, right, it does nicely change the thickness there and everywhere. Lots of things still missing, like labeling the axis to indicate which view it is. Yeah, I'm under no pretense that this is good, right, or finished in any sense. All of those kinds of things, different labeling and stuff like that, it's stuff to be added as I find it necessary. This particular design is a simple piece, right? It's a tube and 2 triangles welded onto it. So you could make the argument that to fully convey the design details of a simple project, I don't need all kinds of fancy functionality. But as my designs get more intricate and you need to be more specific with what you're showing, those kinds of features will absolutely be necessary. So I will implement stuff like that as I come across the need for it. Yeah, at least that's my current plan of action. And as is obviously well, maybe it's not obvious, but this here is sort of a convoluted way that I had to draw this shape. So the outer points are just an equilateral triangle with these 3 points here, but the actual thing itself is going to be made with a piece of flat bar and cut and welded at the corners here, and then cut off at the top so that a tube can be welded onto it. And in order to draw this shape, I had to do some kind of weird things with parametric lines to automatically calculate for me the cutoff distance. So it's a little convoluted, and I kind of look at that and think I might be able to make a more effective kind of helper for building those things up. I just haven't done it here yet. Let's see here. One thing you probably want to consider is keep a clean core and a separate layer on top that applies good defaults and conventions. That pattern will help you to be able to keep things manageable. A separate layer on top that applies good defaults and conventions. Yeah, so I see exactly what you're saying. What I don't have an answer to up front is what would be in the core and what would be good defaults, right? I'm not disagreeing with you at all. I think it makes total sense. But then the what is core and what is convention, I don't have a straight answer for. That's another set of things that as I build more designs, I think it'll become clearer and clearer what becomes. So for example, if you have a global constant, rather than have the function use it directly, the idea is to pass it in as an argument. Yeah. Then in the wrapper, pass the constant. Would that be... So that kind of ties into, you mentioned before, the idea of, so I've got here just a bunch of defs, slapping those all into some kind of, call it state atom, and then everything that needs a global has as one of the arguments automatically the state atom or something like that. Same thing can be done all the way if you really wanted to for all the functions, if you can imagine ever wanting it parametric. Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. And obviously it seems like a bit of an easy way out cheat to just make things global like this. It kind of does feel like it goes against the grain of what Clojure is supposed to encourage. So I am absolutely aware that there's probably a more idiomatic approach to this. It's just still in that prototype spot, you know? But you're not wrong. You are not wrong. It's not a problem per se to make things global because of dynamic scope. And they're not really constants either. Just an implicitly passed parameter. Yeah. Right, and so really it's just then maybe implicit passing of the parameter isn't actually the best thing to do. Having things purely functional helps for the actual design and to keep things clean and minimal in the core as a design tool. Right, and yes, I understand. Right, which would mean that, strictly speaking, this here, since it's using these global parameters, is in fact not purely functional because it changes when you change things outside of it, I guess, unless I'm misunderstanding the strict definition of purely functional. But yeah, your point stands. You have done that for a lot of things already, just pointing it out explicitly. Sorry, what have I done? The implicit passing, is that what you're referring to? Or the explicit? I lost the thread for a second there. What was I doing here? Let me scale this CAD view back down to, it was 7 before. Okay, so let me briefly have a look at this CAD view function and see why the views are shifted or rotated the way they are. Oh yeah. This was not the cleanest way to do this. Let me How did I do this again? The bar length is 30. Let's make it 20 so it's a little shorter. The design is mostly purely functional already. To clarify, in principle, there is a correspondence between those Clojure globals with implicit parameters. The problem is you introduce a global implicit equality relation compared to using explicit parameters. I don't totally understand what you mean with that last sentence there. You introduce a global implicit equality relation compared to using explicit parameters. I don't totally know what you mean, to be honest. I'm not being dismissive. I just don't understand what specifically you mean about that last sentence. Easily by bending some flat bar. Sure. The top corner of the triangle should be cut off to provide a space to weld the bar onto the base, onto the leg, to weld the leg and bar together. There. Pardon me. All instances of the parameter are the same for the whole control flow, whereas if passed as explicit parameters, it would be easy to swap out at every stage. Now, in this case, you have a very simple control flow. It might not be an issue, but conceptually it makes it more complicated. If you ever have the need to use trampolines, you break things. That is a very good point, actually. Yep, you're right. If you use async, things get broken. Yeah, I've had that on my mind as well. And you've correctly identified that this control flow is simple, right? So I or simple is yeah, it's a very simple control flow, and it's definitely not a massively scalable control flow. But once again, I'm starting with what I know I can do and learning and building the library as I learn and build with designs in general. So what you bring up makes a lot of sense as something to start working on when I get more and more complicated parametric design work, because what you point out, where for every step of the way you can change, or I can't change the parameters in every stage. That's a good point, and I'll probably want to be able to do that at some point. But so far, I've not done that. Let me make a little note here. Oh, here, this, yeah. The sketch above will not match the final design. It is just provided as a visual reference. My design will be using flat bar triangles. There. Once you introduce constraints, you will end up with more complicated control flow. That's the only practical reason. Theoretically, it's really that things are independent. Things that are independent should be independent. Things that are the same should be the same. Right, and that makes complete sense to me as well. These changes, I know, like, part of me is like, there's some things I know I should do, but it'll be hard for me to motivate to do them until I run into, oh, I absolutely need this in order to complete the design I'm working on, kind of thing. Maybe that's kind of a cop-out for just not doing everything right away, but there's some things that I know I will need sort of an external reason to really sit and do them. So I'm banking on that in the future. Let me see here. So one thing that's not great, so since like this design, if I'm really honest, I'm building it tonight with my brother. We're going to the shop and we're cutting the tube and all that and just welding it all together. It's really not going to be a hard design. I could draw it on a napkin and we could make it, like, we don't even need to make a drawing set to describe it. But I kind of think it's a good exercise to do it anyway and kind of use it a little bit. And what's cool already is it is possible, like, if I say the height that I want is not 12 inches off the ground but instead 9 inches, right, which you might easily want, I don't necessarily want to have to remember how to calculate all of these lines, right? It is cool to have the document show you based on your input. I think that's pretty cool. So on that note, I attempted and was messing around with this version here that has some of the code, or that interprets the code in the browser, and it's a total big mess. It doesn't work perfectly, but it was that same idea, and I thought it was pretty cool. So let me see that it actually does work here. If I change this to 4, it does, in this case, change in the browser as you're changing the code. So this would be this is a sort of prototypical example of what would be cool as a design tool for some user who might want to change a few things in the design but not do the whole design themselves. There's some obvious issues. For one, I don't know why it's not rendering the lines. I didn't figure that out yet. So this version of things is not perfect yet. And you also have, I have these global parameters here, right? So let's change this height to 9. That is all fine and good, but by default, since that's in a different code block section in the document, it doesn't change this until you make a change in this block as well. Now I'm fairly certain the Clips plugin that I'm using can let me link them together so that a change in one does update a change in the other, but this seems a little unstable. So in terms of end user usability, there are almost certainly better approaches to it. The other thing that would be really cool is to expose at the front here, not even these as numbers, but have them rendered into UI things like sliders or checkboxes and stuff. All the code is not visible and only the diagrams show up. So at the top of a document, well, I want it to be 2.5 feet long instead of just 1.5 feet. And I only want it to be 8 inches high, not 12. And the user of the document could adjust all of those up top and scroll through and read all the documentation and see all of the numbers and things just calculated up front. Personally, I don't like to use tools like that simply because they're usually trivial to build yourself, almost always lack some sort of feature that's useful, that linking in are usually not simple but rather easy. I suppose I'm really picturing that kind of a tool more as a use for the builder, right? Someone who wants to build the thing, right? And instead of buying or getting, let's say, a set of CAD drawings that are just a single thing, they would get this dynamic document that you can fiddle with the sliders and stuff. I mean, you might totally, your point is totally fair. I wonder if maybe we're picturing slightly different people using it. Or maybe I'm wrong in my assumptions that it would be useful. I don't know. But it was a thought that I thought anyway would be pretty neat. Yeah, I don't know. Your comment is about clips. Yeah, that you spelt it correctly. It's this here. This is just a blog using it. Oops. This is it here. KLIPSE. I misunderstood what tool you were talking about then, but yeah. So, this is another example of me using a tool to make a working sort of prototype, right? To kind of play around with things. I would generally agree. Probably if I'm going to build my own set of software tools in this space in general, right? What I'm showing here. I think you're probably right that if it is fairly straightforward to make my own, it would be better to do so than to use this plugin directly. But it was a tool at hand, and it did show off things the way I want. Pardon me. So Not totally useless, at least for me right now. And it's well documented. There's a lot of neat use cases and stuff like that. So I'm pretty fascinated by it, to say the least. But your perspective makes a lot of sense. You know, easy and simple, what's what? I don't know. What it does that's maybe non-trivial is to put the source code of those blocks into a sandbox. Yeah. Exactly the kind of feature you don't need. Yeah. Fair point. That is a fair point. All right. Trigger the reeval with some debouncing. Everything else is just wiring up a pre-existing editor component in Reagent. Yeah, the editor that they use is it's one that's used all over the place. CodeMirror, right? Yeah, like it's a fairly substantial sort of REPL thing from my understanding of it. There's a lot of functionality that I have not explored in it at all. But you might like, if it's way more features than I need, should I use it? Maybe not, is ultimately the thrust of the thrust of these conversations, right? It's not a simple architecture, but an easy architecture that goes against the Clojure philosophy in your book. So I'll be honest, I've never heard of that criticism of Clips yet, but to consider. Clips architecture may be more on the side of easy as opposed to simple. For the stylo library, it may be unnecessary and perhaps even unwise long term to use Clips, especially when the main functionality can be reproduced within stylo. Honestly, it doesn't matter. What I'm saying is, if you use a tool that feels like it's almost what you want but somehow doesn't work, it may just be easier to build your own rather than try to make the tool into what you want. Yeah, that's a good point. That is a very good point. One thing that perhaps is a difference between your circumstance and mine is, you've said it before, you've got several years worth of experience, right? Whereas I don't. So there are times where I don't know if making a thing work is actually easy and I just don't understand it, or straightforward or simple, however you want to describe it, and I need instead to learn some of the basics, or if, like you say, maybe it's the wrong tool. Sometimes it's still hard for me to disambiguate those circumstances, you know? This is an often encountered fallacy and the problem with easy designs, because they trick you into buy-in. Once you've started using it, you'll feel compelled to extend it and end up spending ridiculous amounts of time on it. Yeah, that could very well be. Yeah. It's partly a marketing strategy because it'll make the original project popular. It's what Rails did for Ruby, for example. Right. You know, that makes a lot of sense. In the world of open source software, sometimes I can see the argument for wanting to make things extremely popular, right? Because then you get continued use and support from some wider community, at least theoretically. But in the Clojure world, it's definitely very true that can I roll my own, simple architecture that's this big and does precisely what I need it to for my case, or pull in this easy thing that's easy to use. And Clojure seems to take a rather different approach, which seems to be a little bit what you're talking about now. It makes sense. But like you said, every day I'm just chipping away at my my ideas in my library, and I'm trying to kind of bring things into a focused and useful state. And using clips for this kind of thing is one of those more on the fuzzy side of things, where I'm trying it out, seeing if the workflow and the idea is pretty cool and all that kind of stuff. You're not wrong to point out that maybe there are other ways to go about it. It was just, I knew it existed and I grabbed it to try it, And like, it is just like the silly, like the child part of my brain is still fascinating. Like, I love making a change and seeing it affect what you've written like that. Like, it is to me, it's very viscerally satisfying. So that's why I grabbed it too. But anyway, that now is a bit of a tangent from some of the work I want to finish up on here. So let's see here. It's not really about Clojure per se, but the notion of framework and libraries in this particular case. Clojure, the compiler, is a library. Shadow CLJS is a library. Clojure script is a library. And they're all simple designs. Right. Right, in the simple designs, they've got such broad, like they've got great impact because they can be used in so many powerful ways in so many different cases at that point. Sometimes, and this is maybe just my own naivete, but it sometimes does seem like libraries are, at least in some of the stuff I've looked at, they basically do become frameworks. But maybe that is related more to the design of the library itself, right? Like when is a library not a framework, and when is it? Sometimes to me they seem like they overlap in concept a little bit, but that could so easily be me just not totally grasping the distinctions all the time. So let me just think for a moment. I have to this CAD view in the document is not so helpful right now. The next thing I want to do is I want to make a side view of this thing where I can show some of the dimensions of the other stuff instead. Did something break? I wonder. Oops, I did that wrong. I'm trying to force myself to get a little bit used to Clojure mode and stuff like that so that I start to use the tools a little more efficiently. Because you've pointed it out that those are areas where I could probably improve a little bit. Right, so the next thing I do want to try work on is well, let me just cut to the chase and just delete that, like, oop, that, and then I can write here let's see, to form the legs properly, first, what would it be called? Oh, a framework is something where any of your code becomes part of it, that it only has meaning in that frame. So that would mean if you ever change to another framework, you have to rewrite it. In principle, when you use libraries, the principles of orthogonality, then it only solves one thing, has well-defined semantics, and you can imagine, often trivially, to replace it with your own implementation. Right. Okay. That's extremely helpful. Framework code is part of the framework. Change framework and the code must be rewritten. Library code, like you say, informal definition. Yeah, well, and that's sufficient. Your point makes complete sense, right? Like, if I think of, say, Clojure's core library, any one of the functions within you can implement in your own way if you wanted to overload or whatever. But the core library is very clearly not a framework for anything. Whereas anything like plugin is dealing with a framework. So I was fiddling around last week with a reframe project, and I mean that has the word frame right in it. I'm going to strongly assume that reframe is an example of like a web app framework that uses a bunch of different Clojure libraries and kind of wraps it all into an opinionated approach to building an app or something like that. But let me just quickly get this little thing just finished up here. Library code. Let's see. Has well-defined semantics. Solves one thing and can theoretically and often trivially be swapped out for your own impl, something like that. As far as I know, it's a library. Oh, well, I'll have to keep reading on this stuff to have firm up your understanding. Yeah. Anyway, for what I'm doing today, it isn't going to matter, but these are interesting discussions anyway, so thanks for sharing. I do appreciate that. Depends if you consider the dispatch mechanism a thing you can trivially replace with your own implementation. It's mostly just helpers that all translate into one or two concepts. Fair enough. Okay. Oop. Figure. Side view with dimensions. Okay, so reframe, it's mostly just helpers that all translate into one or two concepts. The methodology around it is a frame in a way, but it doesn't enforce it. So the methodology is a framework, but the code is a library. Okay, so yeah. It can get a little fuzzy in terms of the definitions, but I see your point. Framework methodology using code as a library with weak enforcements. If you look past documentation and comments, there's not much code inside. There. Probably a reasonable study exercise to give that a bit of a read. This is, in fact, that has to go further down in another section here. We've got the design, we've got the legs, we've got the bar. The bar is just a 1.5 inch diameter tube. Ooh, this is an example of I can't do this right now, but this 1.5 inches is technically, I made it 2, it should be 1.5. That's my bad. It is technically, it should be directly linked to this right here. Right, so right now I have 2 spots where I would have to change it, and I have to remember to manually change them. So that's not great. I can cheat it right now by doing this, which is not how I really want it to be. If I do P, the bar is a, oh, and if I just do this, string, oops, shoot, I goofed it, fix that there. The bar is a sometimes it feels really silly to type out how to build something, right? Like you just weld it on is really what you need, but how do you make it in a sentence that doesn't sound silly? It's kind of hard sometimes. Reframe does use the R atom from reagent, by the way. One of the most useful abstractions for reagent that you use for all kinds of projects personally. So the reagent atom, I've heard of it and I've used it, but I do personally need to really try to understand it. Oh, the reactive atom. Well, yeah, it's from reagent. I know, I've heard of it. I'll have to look it up. I do believe it's not like a global state atom, right? It's like a state atom that's tied to sort of just a component. And so let's say you have a system that's got, let's say 5 components in total. If they're all components that do react to different inputs and stuff, you could theoretically have 5 different R atoms, 1 for each component. Is that correct, or am I wrong on that? I would assume not necessarily, but sometimes. And here we just do what was it? Oh yeah. Okay, I think that's right. It's essentially a normal atom plus a mechanism to do dynamic functional reactive programming. A normal atom, you can attach a watcher to change it. You can also attach a watcher to a read of it. And so then you can easily construct a dependency tree. And you've got a spreadsheet like update for free that automatically cleans up after itself. Well, when you put it that way, that sounds very awesome. So that makes a lot of sense, that you could attach a watcher also to a read of it. That is definitely useful. It's like 20 lines of code in a protocol. Definitely on the list right here. Thanks for the tip. Okay. Oh, what have I done? Okay, so this at least works. Can I cheat this and do if I'm lazy? Yeah, that works. I'm not gonna do that though because I don't wanna be bad. Okay. Oh, of course. That isn't showing up because I haven't called it yet. Leg side view dimensions. This here will need to be rotated by the 3D rotate. Which will be 90. I don't remember what the rotate is, so I can change it, but let's build the document anyway. Have a look. It's also useful in a few JavaScript libraries like MobX. I don't know what that library is. So others have stolen the ideas clearly. Is it stealing ideas or oh, what's the word? Paying tribute to. You know how like the advice for artists is like steal like an artist or whatever it is? Steal like a programmer? Okay, so this isn't what I expected to see. Oh, let's add a little move in here for a minute as well. There's like never any attribution in programming circles for some reason. Oh, okay, so right, so I have the thing in view. I forget what axis. It's not a new idea. There have been papers from the 80s on it. Yeah, so like I kind of, how do you properly attribute an idea like that? Do you reference the paper and then do you also reference, oh, I also saw it implemented here, 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 here? That's not an excuse, right? I mean, attribution is, I think, a really important thing to do, but I totally see why the easier way to do it is to not attribute it. That's not an excuse, though. Not an excuse. Let's change the scale of this. People have been rediscovering stuff every few months. Why? Oh, I didn't join the leg 2 into the leg 2, which is just here, is an exact copy of leg moved over by the width of the leg. Pretty easy. Almost everything to read is based on misconception. So what's the right sources then? Is all the most correct information in like research papers and stuff. I personally, I would imagine there are some spots where papers would have like legitimately, this is the origination of an idea, this is an implementation of it, and further work becomes potential for misconception beyond that point. But I don't know if you only ever read papers, would you end up with sufficient knowledge to do everything in the modern development environment? I have no clue. Surely there's other sources than just papers, but you do bring up a good point that rediscovery is a pretty common thing. Let's see here. So if I move this back by another 2 inches, how does that look? Let's have a look visually to see if that looks nice or if it looks silly. It looks like it doesn't exist anymore. How about that, huh? Oh, this is minus. I can't just slap it on the end there. Silly of me. For example, read on the original formulations about object-oriented design, and the first sentence says, it's about passing procedures into other procedures and have them capture closures. This is exactly what people now call functional programming. The people that don't use purely functional programming languages. That's a pretty stark example. I see your point. I have no solutions for that kind of problem. I'm not a genius. I'm just a guy trying to learn stuff. OOP is different than functional. Yeah, well, so I certainly am aware of that. Let's see here. Oop. Shoot. Oh, hey, wow, so clutch. I was glancing at the chat out of the corner of my eye and didn't notice that you had joined. Thanks for tuning in and joining. Hey, wow, so clutch. Is that is that like a bot comment or command or something like that? I hate to be the bearer of bad news if it is. I don't have any bots set up at the moment. Oh, it's a person waving. Pfft. This person's feeling really dumb right now. That's my bad. Hello. Oh man, now I feel silly. That's my bad. That's a person saluting. That's clever. Great to see another developer that both knows about Lisp and Smalltalk. Yeah, hey, wow, so clutch. Lumi seems to know all kinds of stuff about Lisp and all kinds of things. Like, you guys have at it and chat with each other all you want. You don't have to mind me. I'm just yammering on about nothing sometimes, you know? I don't even know what a wave means, so don't let me get in the way of any good discussion, eh? That wouldn't be fun. let's see. I want to move this one by the G-bar inset. Is that going to work? Let's see if that works. Did I break something? Would appear that indeed I have. Okay. Oh, oops. Let's see. Is there a? Ooh, I did it wrong. Right, I need to learn a few shortcuts there. Save that. Now, what did I do wrong here? That one didn't move. Also, Clutch you mentioned a book a minute ago. 99 bottles. Bottles OOP might be useful for understanding. Oop. Yeah, well, so Clutch, you might not have been here for that. Lumi was trying to enlighten me with the definitions and differences between frameworks and libraries and stuff like that. He brought up Rails as well. Oh, okay, so this is something in my current approach here that is kind of right. So I've defined the leg piece here, and I moved it, and because leg 2, this one, is based off of leg, I would have to move it by 2 times the inset, right? Because so now they're linked to each other, but what might be better is to do something like this. I don't know if this is actually better, but there's that. And then leg doesn't need the move on it at all. Like that. And then both of them are defined relative to the origin of this shape directly. Well, now what did I do? It doesn't make sense. Oh, yes, so leg 1 is working there, but I didn't draw it. I have to in fact, I do def assembly is the join of leg 1, leg 2, and tube, right? Which means here I can actually get rid of those entirely and just do, oh shoot, let me just, I only need to get rid of one, assembly, there, and then here in this other view I can replace this with assembly, just like that. Does Ruby have immutable data structures like built into the core of its library, or is it like stuff that people have added later on? Clojure is technically a dynamic language as well, actually. Wow, so clutch. If I'm understanding the terms correctly. Lumi, your main point, people have written libraries for that. Oh, for immutability in Ruby, but it's not right in there. Okay. Okay, so now I have this. So I've got the front view with some of the dimensions that I want on it, and the side view, which I would like to add dimensions to now. So this now, let me just make sure that dimension works the way I want it to here. If I make a dimension from 0, 0 to g bar length, which is 20, yeah, oop, I'll leave it there. Let's see there. Can you give an example of when you would want to use an immutable data structure? Lumi will have a good example, I think. Right, so immutably, right, if I define A to be an empty map, and I do update in A, am I gonna, is this gonna work? Actually, I don't know. A, B. Oh wait, I would have to, sorry, let me just assoc into A, new, right? So def B as the assoc of A. A is still empty, B is that whole thing there. That's immutability just simply. And the reason to do that is Lumi's saying you don't have to worry about something changing from under you when you get a reference to something. Yeah, but if immutability is there by default, whatever you get is guaranteed to always be the same, which is really nice. One sort of parallel and concurrent programming becomes trivial. That's not something I have actually done yet, but it's something I'll need to do eventually, I think. Oh, this is showing up nicely there. Okay, let's see if I do... I think, wow, so clutch. I think you might be slightly mixing up immutability and type checking. They're not really the same thing, right? Right, like an immutable thing. What's it? Let me see if my brain is going to come up with a nice way to describe it. No, I can't think about it necessarily right now. But like Clojure is the example of that, right? Like it's dynamically typed, but the structures themselves are immutable, right? And you could put, and some people have worked on type systems that work in Clojure, but that's sort of an independent idea from immutability, if I'm understanding it correctly. And the big asterisk on everything I talk about is I'm self-taught, so there's a reasonable chance that I don't fully understand everything, which is one reason I keep trying to do these things, is keep trying to learn and learn and learn. Hey, Mapuza, hopefully I'm saying your name right there. What you said is accurate and well put. Thanks. Unless you're talking to Lumi or someone else up there. Hey, Mapuza, just noticed that you followed now as well. I appreciate that. +1 to Clojure on Twitch. Hey, I'm glad to bring it. I will admit up front, I'm not probably the most effective Clojure programmer. There's a lot I'm still learning, but if you're down for the kind of casual learning approach over time, that's me all the way. Maybe it's different in Clojure. Haven't used Clojure very much. Right on. Thanks, eh? Hey, by the way, please do not let me or my ramblings derail any useful chats you guys have going on amongst yourselves, eh? It's cool to see people asking questions and answering them, so, if I'm not helping, don't let me derail things, Mapuza, I'm just curious, are you a regular Clojure programmer? And if so, what kind of projects do you work on? Ooh, wow, so clutch is starting the oven. Making some grub. Or like doing some weird chemical experiment, who knows? Used to do it in your day job, now I'm on Rust. Oh man, that's cool. Rust is something I know nothing about other than it looks really intriguing and it's on my list of things to learn next kind of thing. Seems really cool. Everything personal tends to be in Clojure because it's the best. I feel like I might be a little biased, but I tend to agree. I really love Clojure. I am self-taught, and the first language I really tried to dig into was Python. And for various reasons, I kind of wanted to move on to something different. And Clojure has been a ton of fun to really muddle with and try to learn, you know? Depends on what you want to do, in my opinion. All right, Lumi, are you referring to using Rust? Okay, let me add a dimension here. Right, so the next dimension I want to add is going to be from, I want to put a dimension here to show that gap there. I think, unfortunately, the way I've implemented the dimension render is it's not going to be readable because it's the gap is too small and the text and everything's too big. But I want to see how that looks so that I at least know how to make it look better in next iterations. Okay. The next one to do, that's going to be from 0x and global bar diameter in the y, which will put the start point right there. And the end point here will be bar inset and bar diameter. That should work there. Oof. Oh, if I actually swap this with that one, the order, the start and end points that you put the dimension on will flip the side that the text is written on, which is really useful. Now, the problem here is that that looks like a pile of junk. That's not good enough. So if I zoom in, that would look nicer, but I don't want to have to zoom in on tons of parts there like that. So I will need to create at some point, oh, that also didn't fix it anyway. So forget that noise. I don't know what I'm talking about. Let me comment that one out and put a little note here. Dimensions need a mechanism for having the dim label move to a readable spot. So for example, if dimensions length is less than the label do something. Sorry, I'm just, if I'm not talking, I'm actually just kind of reading through your conversation a little bit. It's informative stuff sometimes on my end. Probably learn, hey, wow, so clutch. I say that to myself basically every day. Wow, I should probably learn more Clojure. Oh, wait a second. Most of your Lisp use happens in Emacs. Wait, so do you write Ruby and your Rust and stuff like that? You use Emacs for all of that? I always, for some reason, my brain just goes to, if someone is an Emacs user, they must be using one of the Lisp languages more than anything else. But oh, you're using Vim these days? Cool. Hey, Lumi and Mapuza, just FYI, even for me, what you've been talking about with immutability and types is actually informative on my end as well. So keep it up. Thank you. Okay, so that dimension looked like crap. So I'll put one more right here to show the width of those pieces, and for the time being, that'll be probably pretty good. Right, the more I think about it, putting dimension labels on like this, like it's actually a pretty complicated, or complicated's maybe not the right thing. There's a lot of cases that you have to consider, right? Like, well, okay, if it's a tiny dimension, you need the arrows to be drawn the other way. And when you draw them the other way, suddenly you have to make new points to draw them from and stuff like that. And it's a bit of a pain, to put it bluntly, but that's gonna be okay. One little bit at a time. One little bit at a time. Okay. Right, so this dimension down here is gonna start at G bar inset in the X direction, and in the Y direction it's gonna be G base height, which will be 9 right here in this case. And actually I want to, so that'll be the second point, which is right there where my mouse is, and this point here I'm gonna make it's gonna be G bar inset plus G leg width and G base height. It would be way cooler. Oh man, that looks, what the, that's weird. I don't know why it looks that way. Let's see. Well, it's the same problem, right? The label is still bigger than the dimension itself. So the arrows have incorrectly, like they're just drawn, they're just wrong. It's just not correct. So that'll be something to fix, obviously. Is Vim actually faster than Emacs? I'm willing to believe that, but I actually didn't know which one was faster. Mapuza, sadly it is. Also concurrency problems in E-Lisp. Yeah, actually the concurrency stuff, right? This, I feel it here, right? So this file is tangling a lot of code there, and it's not running like asynchronously or anything. I feel like you can fix it, but like you have to mess around with stuff, and so you do run into issues. Biggest use of Emacs these days is org mode. Org mode for the win. Actually, so you can get everything in Vim now that you do have in Emacs. There is proper pluggability support now. So I've actually I just so everyone in chat is aware, I do not want editor war comments and stuff like that. Anyone is totally allowed to use whatever editor they want, and I think it doesn't matter. But I've been thinking about, like, I love org mode. It's probably my favorite thing about Emacs. But if you can get org mode in Vim, that might be a thing that would get me to start learning it so that I could use both, kind of thing. Free farm editors? I actually don't know what you mean by that. I know editors can become like a source of people with you have a bone to pick with some opposing editor or something like that. We don't need to go there. I know I've used Vim before, and if I learned it properly, I could be super fast with it, which is also true in Emacs. I haven't learned it properly yet either, like, because there's so much to learn. There's so many things I don't know. Anyway, they're all good. Not something I care to argue about either. There is a prototype E-Lisp interpreter for Vim. People have tried to port org mode, but never a proper port. Man, that's pretty cool, Lumi. That there's an E-Lisp one interpreter even. Note to self, try Vim a bit more. Just have fun with it. Editors are cool, but they won't program for you. Yeah, that's really the thing. Eh? I don't want to get too in the weeds of messing with stuff, right? Like if you're writing code and the code's working and you're writing it reasonably well, that's kind of more important than messing around with everything else, right? You have a little side project of porting that? That sounds like a pretty big job there, Lumi. Sounds cool though. I kind of feel like if I learn both Emacs and Vim to, like, let's say 75% proficiency, and I just switch between them at random between streams and stuff like that, then there's no way anyone could possibly make arguments for or against anything. In reality, I'm sure people don't actually care all that much, you know? Personal preference and all that. Just want the feedback loop to be good. Yeah, wow, so clutch. The feedback loop is actually one big draw that I had to Clojure initially, right? Like this, the ability to do stuff like this was intriguing to me. Right? You type your code, you press a shortcut, and it evaluates it right there in the REPL for you, and defining full functions right there, right in the REPL. Like, it was so cool to me, and still is. And that's a really nice tight feedback loop, right? I think it's really neat. Clutch, right? Like, just obviously this is a trivial hello world thing, right? But that feedback I think is so neat. I really do like it. There's also like, and with org mode you can do, you know, the nice stuff like this. and you get the result in the actual document. So you can evaluate things so quickly, right, in different spots. It just is neat. It's just really fun. Important to see the changes as I make them. Yeah, wow, so clutch. I showed this a little earlier. This is a big, huge old mess. So don't take it. It's neat, but it's also productive, I think, at least. Yeah, I tend to agree. This stuff I'm working on, right, is making sort of documents with CAD kind of diagrams right in there. A little thing I threw together, and it needs a ton of work, so it's not nearly done. There's this plugin called Clips, K-L-I-P-S-E, Clips, that turns code blocks interactive in your browser. And Lumi raised a bunch of good points about maybe it being not what I need in long term, but as a prototype I put it together to try and build quick feedback right in your browser as well. So for example, if I change these, like I can change the values and they get reevaluated right away. So the reason I say there's a ton of work is, as you can tell with this diagram, there's no lines and there should be. So something didn't work, like the running it in my Clojure environment, I get the diagrams working like I expect, but running it in the browser, something is missing still. So, but the idea of being able to change this right in the browser and seeing what changes right away, right? You see that the height changed to 20. I think it's cool. Sort of interested in Elm for this reason. Elm's another thing I've heard of, but I don't know much about Elm actually. But not a fan of Elm. So actually I don't know much about Elm at all. Does it have does it have its own virtual machine? Or is it like compiled to transpiled to JavaScript or something like that? I don't know anything about it. I wonder if I can cheat something for a minute here. If I go to this messy dimension function and scale the label, what does scale 1 look like again? Elm takes all the bad stuff from Haskell, it leaves almost all the mechanisms to build abstractions. Huh. Hot take. So it is a compiler to JavaScript. Huh. Well, I guess it's a good thing I'm not working with Elm at the moment, eh? Oh, it does make efficient code though. That's nice, at least. Okay. Sorry that my focus kind of bounces around a little bit everyone watching. That's my bad. Sometimes some days, focus is really nice and easy. Some days it's not. I will say though, having a chat window in your vision does definitely contribute to kind of shifting your train of thought from time to time. That's nothing bad. That's I'm choosing to do a stream while I'm programming, right? So it's my own decision. But occasionally it's nice to focus, But it's not happening today as much as I would have liked. So it goes. Okay, so what I was thinking of doing though is messing briefly with the scale of the labels on these dimensions. If I can scale it smaller, I could maybe make it look okay without doing any real work. So Lumi, that you talk about great error messages in Elm, that's interesting because Clojure script, and Clojure in general, often has people complaining about, oh well, this didn't work like I wanted it to. Scratch that. Let me forget that. Okay. Clojure and Clojure script, often I see people talking about bad or confusing error messages and stuff. So as a contrast anyway, that's pro-con kind of thing. I could see the point. I have to get up and stretch for a minute and go to the washroom, so keep each other company. I will, in fact, be right back. I won't be long. I promise. Just give this a little mute for a second. All right. That was necessary. Felt good to stand up, I should say. time travel debuggers. Is a time travel debugger the kind of thing that, like, okay, so you load in your app initially, right, and it's got some initial state to it, and then time travel debugging is just kind of like it tracks every change that happens to the state over time, and then you can go forward and back. Is that what time travel debugging is? That would be my guess. Click a button, triggers an event. You can go back on every discrete change. Okay, cool. That would be really useful, I would imagine, especially with like complicated front ends and stuff like that. Seems useful. Wow, so Clutch, you said you built a small micro auth provider in Python recently, and you're building client examples with different tool sets for the fun of it. It's pretty cool. Sounds like a fun project. Can even record stuff and make it into a test. Neat. I wonder, like, that sounds like you could make like a weird sort of game out of it too, even, right? Or like you could use it for game testing in neat ways, right? You could like rewind your action and then, wait, that's the game. There must be games like that already, right? You could have the user submit the action log. Sorry, tangent. I wear an Apple Watch, and like every hour it wants you to stand up, right? I don't know if you guys know that, but I hate when I miss one. So I'm just looking at it now, making sure I got it. Okay. My watch does that. I use this, I track my activity, right? It's just like a calorie burn goal every day. I have successfully got it like for 435 days in a row. So I'm really not keen on missing it now. I'm doing a bike challenge on Strava this month. That's cool. Do you do like mountain biking or road biking? Or like BMX or something? Okay. So these dimensions look like butts, but for the time being, I am going to ignore that because I'll have to come up with a solution later. Road bike at the moment. 275 kilometers over 6 bike rides. Man, wow, so Clutch, that's awesome. A lot of front ends are pretty complicated nowadays, specifically the stuff I'm making. Of course, reframe would be overkill for a trivial app. You're more into bike packing and touring than road racing, stuff like that? Yeah, well, so Clutch. I lived in the Netherlands for 2 years, and I had a bike there, and I would use that to go to and from work, and it was like a touring kind of bike. Oh man, that was my favorite way to ride. You didn't have to hammer it hard, you know. It was a really nice bike. And of course, it's a beautiful country to be biking in. So yeah, doing the bike packing and stuff like that, I totally get it. Really relaxing. Absolutely. Lumi reagent is just fine for something simple like what we see on screen here. Yeah. Yeah, that's the other side of all this stuff, is I mean, kind of, Lumi, you were saying it earlier on that, you know, you don't always have to go for, you don't always have to go for the big whole thing, right? If your problem's this big, you know, you can use the small, simple thing. Want to do some of the backpacking in the Canadian Rockies routes? Oh man, I'm right there with you, man. Or fellow folks, I'm right there with you. Beautiful, the Rockies, eh? I can't get out there quite enough. It's all the way on the other side of the country. First cut with a weld the inner corner to hold the shape. Right, so what I want to add here is a bit of a some kind of diagram for welding or cutting and welding that V. So we'll see if I can make something up there. Should have been reframe, not reagent. Sorry, I'm just trying to track here for a moment. Oh, reframe is just fine for something like what we see on screen here. Yeah, no, I got you. That's cool. Oh, sorry, I'm reading the wrong thing. Okay, so the point of reframe is to be able to scale the design if you have a couple hundred components that need to communicate, right? But reagent is more than enough for something kind of simpler. What I'm doing isn't even what you would call an app. It's more of a document. So it makes sense. You don't really need massive scalability in just a single document, right? Ooh, wow, so Clutch eating pizza. I'm jealous. I don't have any pizza. All right. I have just a little bit of time left. I can't stream for more than about 3 hours today. So what I'm gonna do is try to get one more diagram done. Right, so the kind of diagram I'm thinking of, guys, I'm going to get real high tech with this for a minute. Check this out. There. Yeah, okay. All right, so the diagram I'm thinking of is just going to be, let's see. Basecamp's new email product, hey wow, so Clutch, is that the thing that like people were annoyed because it was called an inbox, like with an M instead of an N? All right, the diagram I'm gonna try to do is something kind of like this. It's just, so you're gonna have a flat bar and this, and maybe I'll show the grinding disc wheel or something like that. I don't know. And then if I'm feeling adventurous, draw a diagram that shows a curved arrow and the word bend. And then finally the third diagram would be, this would be 1, Oh, geez. 2. And then the third diagram would be this. With a little weld bead here. Weld. Right, so I'm not gonna have time to. I don't think I'm gonna have time to get them all done today. I'll just try to make something like that. Think so. Forgot about it. Haven't used Hey yet. Do I do all of my design work programmatically? I work for a design and engineering company, so I'm curious. Hey looks interesting. Oh, so Hey does look interesting. It was actually something I might think of trying out for myself. Hey, but wow, so Clutch, back to your question. So I was working at a manufacturing and design company as well, and there we used SolidWorks. So I'm not working there anymore, and so I don't have access to tools like that. But so any personal design work I do, yes, I basically do programmatically, because I do think that there are a lot of things about it that could be really powerful and good for sharing designs and stuff like that. But the real short answer is no, I don't do all of my design work programmatically. I do a lot of personal design projects programmatically, and I do I do other work for companies and for other people with SolidWorks from time to time. But I do find those tools to be frustrating to use in certain ways. Like if you want to... Oh, something went wrong. Oh, it's right. It's this. What was I saying? So I don't know if you're familiar with SolidWorks at all. Wow, so Clutch. But some of the stuff that I started wanting to do was make more and more complicated parametric assemblies. And so you could either control it with, yeah, you know what SolidWorks is. There's a mechanism inside SolidWorks called design tables, and it's quite powerful. You can give dimensions a name, and then you can make an Excel sheet that has in rows, or pardon me, in columns, the names of the dimensions, and then in rows, different configurations of different values of those things. So what you can do is you could draw a bolt and then make a single design table that specs out all kinds of different sizes and stuff like that. But I found that the more complex stuff you needed to build up for assemblies to make them maximally reusable started to it bogged things down in two ways. One, it made the system a little unstable sometimes, which is not good. And two, it was confusing for other coworkers to edit things properly. Or edit properly, I mean to say, if I built a complex structure up, I was the only one who knew exactly how to edit it without spending a lot of time. Now, a big part of that is a human error, which might be me, right? But the point I'm trying to get to is, for some subset of design work, I really do think that programmatic descriptions of what you want to build make a lot of sense. The limits and the bounds of where it's useful, I'm exploring. I don't totally know. But that's a really long-winded answer, so sorry about that. Find it interesting how different people use different tools. You work mostly on IT of the company. The designers use Python and other things that you wouldn't have thought of. Mapuza, I did something similar to that in FreeCAD a few weeks ago. Very powerful. It's janky at best. Yeah. Hey, Mapuza, interestingly enough, a few years ago, if I go to here, I've got, oops, I don't know what I'm doing. I have this site in progress. I have here, this is a thing I made a few years ago now. I was using like that the answer's detailed. You did do work in school. Sorry guys, I'm losing my train of thought. Mapuza, you mentioned FreeCAD. A few years ago I was working on Python at the time, which, wow, so clutch. All your designers use Python. That's where I started as well. I was using Python. There's a library called CADquery. Let's see if it still exists. It does, which uses FreeCAD under the hood. And I used to be working on it. I had my own set of I have my own reasons for moving on from that a little bit, but I ended up using it and Python here to define a design here, and I even had you know, you could view the different tubes and stuff in the browser. I was pretty proud of this at the time, but as you can see, like, this is not particularly elegant, and it's a heavy installation, right? Because you need to install FreeCAD and you need to have the whole, you need to have a lot of stuff in there. Anyway, so I threw this sort of thing together, and for what it's worth, let me scroll down. Oh, here's the assembly of it, right? It's actually just 1, 2, 3 pieces, and I had a laser cutter. Not like in my house, I just had access to it. And I was able to actually build the thing. So like this is proof that, you know, like it can totally work, it can be useful. It's kind of a toy example, right? But I was pretty proud of it at the time. That's rad. Hey, thanks guys. I appreciate that quite a bit. But so as it is, this kind of stuff I want to keep producing for more and more designs, but I don't want necessarily to be tied into CADquery and FreeCAD if I don't know how to work it and understand it deeply myself. So that's sort of a meta level desire that I have for using Clojure to try and build sort of stuff like that as well. Right now, there's obviously a lot of steps to improve from where I'm at to where I want to get, but that's a bit of an example of where I want to go. Anyway, so Mapuza, you had mentioned FreeCAD, and this I had used. This was from FreeCAD related stuff, so you're totally right. It is quite janky, but it's quite powerful. And I have another one too. This was an old design. I have since disassembled this whole thing because I didn't have room for it. But I wanted to, this TV here, I took the bezel off and threw the bezel away. But I wanted to keep the TV, so I like made this really weird, heavy, super over-designed metal frame around it, which was fun at the time, but needs to be there you go. That was my TV for a while as well. Things got a little out of hand. I'll say that much. The TV still works. I just need to not have a crazy metal frame around it. Anyway, as I keep working on this stuff, right, I do think if you can make cool stuff, it's really fun if you can also share how you made it so that other people can build it and improve designs and iterate that way, right? And programmatic CAD stuff and literate programming and good, nice prose and good diagrams, I think are really helpful for sharing design ideas. And that is what I really want to keep doing. That's kind of a big motivation for me attempting to work on all this stuff. Anyway, that's my rambling. Hope I didn't bore you all to tears. Lumi, you said it earlier, what I would really love is bi-directional integration between CAD and traditional graphical UIs. It's not boring at all? Thanks, I do appreciate that. That's good to know. Lumi, I totally agree. Rambling, that was a proper presentation. Oh, you guys are too kind. Thank you. That's very kind. I appreciate that a lot. This is something I love doing, streaming. I've not been doing it a ton, but one thing that I really do hope to get better at is the presentation style of thing. You stick around the Clojure community, you'll find that this way of thinking is very welcome. Plus 100. All right. Mapuza, if I'm doing my math correctly, I think I'm at now, let's say, 101 or 102. But yeah, I'll admit, one of the higher level reasons that I thought Clojure would be a really good language to learn is because the talks I was watching and the things that people were talking about when they talked about Clojure happened to kind of align with how I was thinking about this sort of stuff already. So, you know, a community like the Clojure community and the developers that use it kind of has a filtering effect, right? So I think maybe I like Clojure because Clojure and the people that use it already have, in some ways, not every way, a similar sort of way of thinking about things. So that was part of the decision making as well. All right. Am I going to focus and get something done? That's the big question for me. Okay, I shall bend detail points. Okay, so the messy way that I do this right now, if I want to build a shape, right, I start by just making a list of points, and those points can either be hard-coded values or based off of some of the globals. And then I pass that through various things. In this case, I had to do some weird complicated stuff to get the right cut depth on this shape. I had to use I used this line function, which was a parametric line, and it put it to the parameter between 0 and 1 and blah, 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 blah. Doesn't matter. But basically, I produce a list of points, and then I have a polygon 2D function that takes that list and puts it into a data structure that I can then use to put through an extrusion to make it 3D, and put that through the figure thing here. Put it through draw edges so that I can actually render out the edges of the thing. So all I have to do here is repeat that idea. So I just start with a really simple list, and then I can draw it on screen and then make sure things are working okay. So just for sake of having a visual on there, let me do let's make one. It's going to be G leg thickness here, yeah, as a starting point, and I'm going to draw all the way along, and it doesn't need, I'll just make it 10, it doesn't need to be anything wild. And G leg T. One thing, because this is a bit of a pattern that shows up a lot, making just point lists, what I'm doing is in my head, I'm basically drawing a shape out and typing out the coordinates of the corners myself, right? Like, that's fine if I can do it in my head, but it would be really cool to be able to sort of spawn either maybe in Emacs or in like a little utility app in the browser, just a little window where you can just click and it'll add points, display the point coordinates, and just draw live. It'll just draw the shape out for you, and then you can copy and paste that back into your thing here. It's Lumi mentioned bidirectional use of tools and stuff like that. That is not bidirectional, but it's like a cool idea. So I might see if I can figure out if I'm smart enough to do that. But for right now, for the sake of this diagram, I'm just going to manually, or think about it in my head and then draw it out. Hard to follow maybe, but yeah. Right, so I'm starting with a rectangle. I'm going to define bend detail to be the extrude of, polygon 2D of bend detail points. And the extrusion is just going to be the global leg width. Yeah, and then I can just draw the figure. 300. Let's give it a scale of, we'll start with 20 and we can adjust it. Bend detail. Sure. Let's move it so it's kind of centered a little bit. Move it 4-4 like everything else. Draw edges recursive, which, by the way, clean up. Draw edges recursive to have a simpler name. Spec and write tests for the rendering functions that I have. Let's spell it properly. There we go. Okay, so if I draw edges recursive of bend detail, let's see if I made any mistakes. I'm willing to bet that I have, but we'll find out. Classic typo. Hey, it worked. And it is indeed just a rectangle. Alright, so now let's, since it's going to be a big zoom in, let's bring the scale up quite a bit. Then the next thing to do is just add in, let's make it double that, and we'll only move it by 1-1. Let's see. Is that got a little aggressive there with the zooming? No. Let's try that. Okay, so it doesn't need to be 10. It can actually be, well, let's call it 6. Lunchtime here, gonna bail. Have fun, hope to catch you again. Hey Mapuza, you go do what you gotta do. No worries on my end. Thanks for joining in, thanks for chatting, and I will be back on Thursday. So if you want to tune in then, I take breaks on Wednesday because I don't wanna burn myself out. So thanks for tuning in, and I'm absolutely keeping this up. So glad that you joined. Oh wow, so clutch! Now I know what this means. I'm a little bit smarter today because I learned that one. Oh man. All right, so the next little thing here, I'm just gonna add. All I need are some more points because what I want to do is draw that little V notch here in the middle of this. Most people use the emote. Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. Hey, don't feel the need to defend my ignorance in this instance. It's totally cool. I mean, there are far worse things to be ignorant of than what symbols mean in the context of a chat. Okay, so just a habit from text-only chat platforms. Oh yeah, I do stuff like that all the time too. I just happen to not know what that one was, that's all. Although on my, if I'm doing iMessage with my phone, I'll just type the word thumbs and then click and then have it put the thumb in there for me. So yeah, I don't know everything about it all. But you go right ahead and use whatever things you got. And if I don't know what they are, I won't hesitate to say so. I'm not afraid to be wrong. At least I try not to be. So the point that I'm going to put here is 2.8 is what I'm going to guess, because I'm really scientific about it right now. And there. And then the middle point of the V cut. Oh, no, this is actually incorrect. Right, so this point is beginning here. I actually need this to be in a different spot. Right? It needs to be after this point here, which is 6, 0. So I have to put it here. And I have to do 3.2, 0. Then the other point on the other side is 2.80, and the point here is going to be 3 divided by 2 of G leg T. So that should, if my brain's thinking properly, it's from you using IRC. Makes sense. Okay, there we go. We've got a divot, a cut, if you will. But this should actually be, instead of just half, let's say, switch it to multiply, because I'm wild like that. Let's say we want it to be 0.8 depth. 80% of the way through the material right here. Yeah, right. And the problem here is technically I do need the bend to be this angle, which is like way shallower than 90. It would be 60 in fact, because this is equilateral. Wait, is that right? 60 times 3, 180. Yes. Right, so this angle here that you grind out of there should be like 120, right? Yeah. So this is incorrect in appearance. I'm not going to label the exact angle because when we're in a metal shop, we have things called hammers, and you grind it down close, you bend it in, and you just kind of hit it with the hammer a little bit, and then it'll eventually sit proper. That's me being what's called a good engineer. No, in all seriousness though, so my brother and I were going tonight to build this thing because we've got a gym in the back and we want to make parallettes. They'll look different than this, obviously. They'll look more like this, but we're building it tonight, and we're just going to use a disc grinder eventual consistency. Absolutely right. Absolutely right. But so the real, I would say, somewhat justifiable reasoning for not being overly particular about it is we're making it tonight. We only have access to a hand disc grinder. So our ability to cut exact angles won't be there anyway. So the idea is you angle it close, right? You fold it in, you jig up the top so the top's nice, and then whatever is wrong on the bottom, you do fill it in with weld. And so it'll still look sufficiently good. So it's a reasonable justification. If I wanted to get like actually argumentative about engineering decisions, that's what I would say. But any there, perfect. Okay, I've only got about, let's say, 10 to 15 minutes left of stream time, and then I do have to get going. So I'm wondering to myself if there's anything a little bit better that I can do about this here. I am actually going to change this up to use a little let here. So if I let the gap be, so I have it hard-coded right here as 0.4, right? So if I just let, oh, I have to, there, right? So now the gap is 0.4, and all I have to do here, right, is this is going to be 3 plus half of the gap, and this is similarly just going to be 3 minus half of the gap. That was a chaotic way to write that out, but okay. So now I have this sort of, it's this local binding, right? And I can just fiddle around with this number until it visually looks kind of like what I want. Kind of the lame way to do it, but it works all right. Okay, now is there a nice way to draw this sort of thing? Let's see if I can invent a weld detail approach here. Weld detail. Right, so the weld detail is just going to be join leg with tube was a regular polygon, I think. See, this is definitely a proof to myself that the workflow that I've built up around this is good for prototype stuff, but there's a lot of refinement I can do in sort of how I actually approach programmatically designing this stuff. Like, things are kind of strewn about all over the place. A lot of things have names that are really unhelpful. Like, if I look at this again in a week, I'll have to step through all the code again. So as much as I want things to be well documented, my current approach gets things done, but doesn't make them clear by default. So that's like that's not perfect yet. There's a lot of room to improve there. One little problem too is there's a lot of churn still around the names of all the functions in the library that I'm working on, right? Like, this is all like this here. Draw edge is recursive. I don't remember it all the time, and I forget the order of arguments, and there's all kinds of stuff that does for sure need some attention in terms of good workflow. And those are things I just notice as I'm using it, right? Imagine you could display the formulas of the variables you're using in the code in the visual presentation to understand how it works. Yeah. Like, do you mean like rendered as mathematical things, or do you mean like code blocks or something like formulas rendered into the SVG spots itself, or are you envisioning something even different than that? Because you're totally right. It's useful to have more than just, oh, do you even mean here even? Non-trivial to implement given what you have. Oh, click a side of the triangle, have it highlight the right code. Oh, yeah. That would be so cool. Like you mentioned earlier, that sort of bi-directional connection between everything. You're totally right. That is non-trivial for what I've built right now. But that's the dream, eh? That would be so cool. Hey, wow, so clutch. Thanks for tuning in. I really appreciate that. Have a nice day. Thanks for chatting. Thanks for joining in. Hope to see you around. If not, that's cool too. It was really fun to have you here. If you build stuff on all constraints and an algebraic representation, it would be easy to do. Yeah. Well, that is, like you say, not how I've done it so far. Okay, bend detail, weld detail. The radius of, or the radius of the weld would be probably 0.2, so pretty small. And I don't need to render it with 24 faces. Let's do 12 faces. I'm cheating. It'll look like a circle, but it's not actually a circle. Weld detail, join leg, and this has to be moved. I have to move it to oh shoot, I also have to extrude this first. And it has to be moved. See, this would as a thread first macro would be easier to read, I think, eh? In principle, you can build that onto this design later because Lisp is flexible enough, but it's non-trivial. Yeah, that is kind of the yet another reason why I like or have chosen to build in a Lisp is for that kind of stuff, right? I can build out a system and swap bits in and out as I learn more, both in terms of my own capabilities improving as well as my understanding of the domain improving. All right, I am so close to done for the day. Let me just try and get this thing working. So all I'm doing is making a little thing that looks like a weld bead, and I'm going to zoom in on the corner of this. That's all I'm really going to do, and then I'm going to get going. So to move it, I just need to move it and down to the base height minus g leg t. Messy, 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 messy. Okay, so bend detail is that, and we'll just copy this and bash it in here. Weld detail. Oh, what have I done? Have I messed something up? Weld details up there. Well, let's see if that actually renders or if I missed something. We shall find out very soon. Hey, okay, we got something. So now I need to just shift the drawing way up so I can actually see the bottom corner that I'm interested in. So let's do -10. Since you're dealing with real world constructions, I think you should think about adding units. That is absolutely an important point. So I'll explain the reason that they're not in the dimensions here in just a second. But you're not wrong, and the reason they're not displayed was a short-term decision of laziness is the truth. And I'll explain it in just a second. If I move this over 1 and this -7. So the dimension, the more general dimension function, work in progress that I have, will calculate and display this distance value by itself. Should be easy if you use math generic. A bunch of full libraries for that stuff. I'll have to look into it. The current reason that it's not displayed in inches and not handling anything is here. In the dimension here, it calculates the distance between the 2 points and it'll display it there, but it has no concept in the function of the unit. So I was going to do the cheating thing and say up front here, unless otherwise shown, all dimensions are in inches. And then technically all of the numbers are in inches now. Is that the real solution? No, it's not good enough. And I just haven't looked in libraries and stuff like that. So you're not wrong to point it out. I just went for, yet again, something that was easy, not necessarily simple. There. Right, U keyword inch 14. Yeah, that makes sense. They can keep track of more complicated units too. Do you have a name of one library maybe that I could just write down as a starting point there? If you're multiplying non-scalar stuff. Sounds very useful actually. Let's see. Bend detail, weld detail. Okay. Units 2. The one found just Googling. Start looking around at mfa/unit 2. Look around, look around for alternatives, or see about implementing myself, whatever ends up being the better solution. I'll get there. But yeah, you're totally right for pointing out that is actually important, right? It's not really fair for me to brush it off by explaining that, well, okay, all the units are in inches, so it's fine. That's really not an engineer doing their due diligence, right? So yeah. They show you how to do it yourself. Yep. Doing units is almost trivial. Fair enough. Oh, I forgot that I'm back. Okay. I am nearly done. All I have to do is let me see here. Come on. There we go. And move that. Wait. Is that actually going to do what I think it is? Yeah, it should. Move it. Where's the... yeah, this old piece right here. Right, so I have to move it here. Let's try that. Okay. Right, so all I'm doing is making a thing that will look like a weld bead, right? Even in stuff like SolidWorks, they represent weld beads basically by a cylindrical extrusion along the spot where you're welding. So that's kind of what I'm trying to represent here, and I'm just moving things around, which isn't. Oh. Yeah. Okay. I don't want to just sit around messing with numbers for the rest. I am gonna get going. This design, I will update it to reflect with some actual pictures what my brother and I end up building for real tonight, and then I can actually turn it into like a pretty decent post. So. Have the pictures have multiple layers of information that can be toggled on and off to show what they mean. That's actually a really good point. Like at it, the first thing that comes to mind is something like, okay, so you have this image and you have a little checkbox here, toggle dimensions so you can put them on or off. But it'd be really cool too, where you could say, toggle dimensions on a per part basis, right? So you layer dimensions onto just this piece, layer dimensions onto that piece, and then layer text annotations on its own layer as well. So you could show and hide all of them in various things with layers. That's actually a good idea. Lumi suggests, or Lumi had idea, toggle layer visibility in figures. Example, hide show dimensions. That'd be more like a tree of layers rather than just a sequence of layers. Yeah, you could, if you don't care about, no, you're right. Sequence of layers, tree of layers, however you implement it, it's a good idea. But yeah, the sequence of layers is the easiest, right? So if everything gets put onto, if all dimensions are on some dimension layer, or have a dimension CSS property, and then a little button just changes the property from hidden to shown, you could make it work pretty quickly. If that's the right way to do it, I don't yet know, but that's a great idea. Thanks for that. I appreciate it. On that note, I was just saying, since I'm building this in real life tonight, I'll be able to take some pictures and actually update the design here and put the pictures all in the bottom. The reason I'm able to do that without properly finalizing the design document is because it's an easy, like this is the most important thing, to know these dimensions, so then I can use that to cut the shape right away, and then to know this dimension. So I'm able to actually build it with a somewhat complete version of the document. Yeah, so I'm excited to actually build it tonight, and if the build works and this document gets finished soon enough, that'll be kind of a cool post to put on the GitHub site. So yeah, I'm pretty excited about that. That'll be enough for me for the day. I am going to get going. I had a great time today. Thanks everyone for tuning in and joining in on the chat. Lumi, thanks again for the tips and advice and input. It's really appreciated, and it's always a lot to absorb, and that's totally cool with me, but I appreciate it. So I will be back, not tomorrow. I've got a lot of work to do, and I don't need to stream every day. I'll get too tired, I think. But I'll be back on Thursday and back on Friday with 2 more streams. So feel free to tune in then and join in on the chat. Right now, I'm going to get going, have some food, and get to the gym. See ya.